Hey, welcome back to the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast. This is episode number 54, and we continue with suspension and brakes from my 2013 book, Steve Vignanti's 1001 Muscle Car Facts. And as you may know by now, in episodes 1 through 53, we covered all of General Motors, Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, Buick, and of course Plymouth, and we're now chewing into the Dodge chapter. Again, these chapters on each make of vehicle are broken down into sub-chapters consisting of legend and lore, body and interior, engine and driveline, suspension and brakes, and then something called number crunching and press commentary. And each of these different sub-chapters will have between 10 and 15 facts, and of course, as always, between each fact, I'll be making some notes on why I chose those facts for the book. Okay, and of course I'm holding this little model of the Little Red Wagon, which brings us into the Dodge theme. I love this model. It's done by IMC/Lindbergh, and you can still get these things today. Round 2 makes these things, and cool little model. Of course, I do have to give props to our sponsor, High Octane Classics, which is the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership. They're located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. A fellow named Dan Marinelli, a good friend, will have him on this show soon. In fact, you might wonder, why are we taping these shows for video? Well, again, soon we will be having guests here on the podcast, so it's going to be more than just an audio experience. But again, you can reach out to the folks at High Octane Classics by calling them at 508-859-4515. Okay. More numbers. Let's begin with suspension and brakes. We're going to continue. And this is fact number 768, Dodge. Though an improvement over the 9-inch drum brakes fitted to slant 6 darts, the 10-inch drum brake package specified for 1965 through 69 V8 cars is prone to brake fade with severe use. To help dissipate heat, a revised rear brake drum was introduced for 1970. Sharing the same 10 by 1.5 inch wide shoes and lining area as previous 10-inch drums, the novel feature was the addition of an integral 2-inch flare that protrudes into the under-car air stream. Unfortunately, the flared drums must be used with 14-inch or larger rims. Stock 13-inch A-body rims used on slant 6 cars contact the drums and prevent installation. Yeah, it's a thing where if you have a 70 340 Duster and you take the rear wheel off, you'll see what kind of looks like Darth Vader's helmet. The brake drum has this flared look to it, and the whole point of that, again, it's sort of a heat sink, and the heat of braking sends the heat out into that flare and into the brake or the airstream where it's cooled off. But again, if you have a set of 13-inch rims on your car and you try to put those rims over these 10-inch drums, front or rear, they're not going to line up. The bolt pattern's the same, but you'll make contact between the outer surface of the drum and the outer surface of the wheel hoop before the rim settles down onto the flange. So 13-inch wheels and 10-inch drums don't work together. But let's move along now into the realm of factory experimental drag racing for fact 769. The NHRA factory experimental class of 1962 through 1966 fostered incredible innovation and some amusing lip service to Wally Park's rulebook. While stock class max wedge and race Hemi vehicles had to be available in modest numbers to the average Joe, FX, or factory experimental, rules invited one-off mixing and matching of engines, suspension components, and vehicles as long as the items were from the same manufacturer's parts bin. It truly was a playground for factory performance engineers. In 1964, Dodge experimented with weight transfer by creating a straight front axle conversion kit with part number 22352 for A and B body drag cars using the new Dodge A100 compact van's beam front axle and parallel leaf springs. The goal was to increase ride height for a higher center of gravity and extra traction on the launch. The April 1965 issue of Drag Racing magazine features a detailed 4-page how-to story using Dick Landy's 1964 Dodge 330 Race Hemi as the guinea pig. A second kit was supplied to Connecticut racer Bill Flynn, who installed it under the nose of his Yankee Peddler 1964 Dodge hardtop. With a straight face, story author John Durbin, writing for Drag Racing Magazine, describes how the beam axle conversion, quote, affords better handling characteristics, end quote, versus the stock torsion bar setup. Who's kidding who? The real goal was altitude. Incidentally, Landy's 1964 Dodge sedan, the sport's first altered wheelbase funny car, is presently owned by respected Hemi racing historian and author Pete Haldeman. Okay, again, this book was written back in 2013, 9 years from now, or ago. It's 2021 right now as I read this. In fact, it's October 31st, Halloween, or Hemiween, how do you want to call it that? I don't know, but anyway, but Pete Haldeman has sold the former Dick Landy 64 Dodge 330, again, altered wheelbase funny car. So Pete, great guy, if you're watching this, we appreciate your contributions to the sport. But again, that whole straight axle routine, if you find yourself a copy of that April 1965 Drag Racing Magazine, you'll see a multi-page great story in black and white showing how the A100 van front axle goes under the nose of a B-body. Kind of wacky, but it was done. And it was not about handling, obviously, because that's not a very light suspension setup. But again, it allowed the nose of the car to go up almost a foot, which of course increased the amount of static and dynamic weight transfer when the light went green. Okay, let's get back into the A100 front axle and its conversion history with fact 770. At 63¼ inches wide, drum to drum, the stock Dodge A100 van axle was too wide for use under A and B body Dodge factory experimental drag cars. To keep the front tires from protruding beyond the body, which was a violation of factory experimental rules, Dick Landy's shop narrowed the I-beam 4 inches. At the other end of the country, a similar straight axle swap was made in Connecticut by Bill Flynn on his Yankee Peddler 1964 Dodge Race Hemi hardtop, which was a converted max wedge car. Flynn's high-riding Dodge beat Arnie Beswick's 421 Pontiac Tempest Coupe with an 11.95-second run to take modified production honors at the NHRA Indy Nationals in September of 1964, proof the A100 weight transfer concept worked. That's right. If you look back in time, 1964, you'll see the record books and photographs of those races do show Bill Flynn's 64 Dodge. Again, it's a hardtop, not a sedan. So it has that narrow B-pillar. Again, born a max wedge initially, but Flynn put a race Hemi in it, and yes, the A100 front axle. But again, to make sure the front tires didn't stick out too much, they absolutely had to narrow it. More on that with fact 771. At the same time, Landy and Flynn were stuffing narrowed A100 beam axles under their 64 Dodge B bodies. At least 3 A100 axle-equipped 1964 Darts were also under construction. Now the A100, or the Dart, is an A body. It's a smaller car than the B body Dodge. In Alabama, Billy Jacobs' Kid Goat and the Liberty Motors Corruptor's Pup featured race Hemis and A100 front axles. Chicago Heights, Illinois hot rodder Jack Sharkey's Rampage Dart started life with a 426 max wedge and 3-speed T85 manual transmission. The stock 111-inch wheelbase car was nose-heavy, and chronic tire spin prompted radical wheelbase alteration surgery. Soon, the wedge gave way to a 426 race Hemi, 727 torque flight, and a narrowed A100 van front axle. Dart match race builders generally removed 5.5 inches from the center of a stock A100 front axle beam to keep the front tires properly tucked under the front fenders. Yeah, this fact, of course, speaks to the fact that the B body, which is the mid-sized Dodge, and the A body, which is the compact-sized Dodge, had different widths. And again, on the A body, which is the Dart, you got to take 5.5 inches out of the front axle width in order to not have the tires stick out and look goofy. Whereas on the B body, a little wider car, about 3 inches will do the job. And how do I know this? Well, I built a replica of the Rampage Dart. In fact, I have a book called How to Build Altered Wheelbase Funny Cars, and it's also from Car Tech Books. That was written, I think, in 2009. But in that book, I show how we cut 5.5 inches out of that A100 beam axle, welded it back together, and it was good. But if you don't narrow it, yeah, the front tires stick out, looks really goofy. Okay, let's move way up in time to the more recent Dodge Drag Pack Challenger program with fact 772. The Drag Pack Challenger program grows from strength to strength with each passing year. But the recent 2011 offering, of which 50 were built, with its Viper-powered 512 V10, has no showroom counterpart. Perhaps the time is ripe for a return of the NHRA factory experimental category. FX was created in 1962 for one-off engine, body, suspension, and induction combinations emanating from the same manufacturer's parts bin, but not necessarily available to the general public. Though Dodge has presented prototype V10 Challengers at recent SEMA shows, conjured by the brilliant magicians at the Mopar Underground, regular production is dead-ended by the fact frontal impact characteristics of the Challenger do not meet federal standards. The massive V10 is too close to the Challenger firewall and won't submarine in a head-on crash. So, with zero likelihood of showroom V10 Challenger offshoots, why not whip up a couple of factory experimental Viper V10 Challengers, slap superchargers or turbos on them, and go hunting for similarly outlaw-built, factory-backed Copo Camaros and Mustang Cobrajet package cars? There's no doubt fans of each make would rally behind the no-holds-barred FX racers, stirring up as much brand loyalty as they did in the good old days. Yeah, that's true, you know. Again, this book was written in 2013, and here I reference the recently built 2011 V10 Viper drag pack cars. Again, it's almost 10 years ago now, but it is true that those V10 Challengers did not have a showroom counterpart, which is kind of an interesting thing. And again, if only the factory experimental class was revived, yeah, well, Dodge could have built some sort of nasty one-off V10 Challenger match racers that weren't really NHRA legal, but which would have revisited the run what you brung days of the early and mid-1960s. Again, would have been cool to see a V10 Challenger match racer, but again, they're still very cool as drag pack cars. And keep in mind, drag packs are not street legal. They don't have VINs. So as cool as they are, they're strictly drag race only. Okay, let's move along, but before we do, I want to thank our sponsors at High Octane Classics, which is New England's largest muscle car and supercar dealership. They're located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. Dan Marinelli and the staff there at High Octane Classics, they buy, they sell, and they service muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. Okay, more numbers. This is fact 773. Let's get into 1968 and those awesome Hemi darts and Barracudas. The 1968 Hurst modified Superstock B Hemi darts and Barracudas featured a simple rear suspension trick designed to move the leaf springs inboard for improved drag slick sidewall clearance. Rather than revise the front and rear leaf spring mounting points on the body, Bob Tarozzi, who was the chief engineer on the Hemi A-body project, utilized fabricated new forward leaf spring mounts that pulled each spring inboard nearly an inch, but bolted up to the stock mounting bulkhead on the chassis. At the rear of the spring, simple offset shackles also delivered a 1-inch inboard spring relocation. The strategy worked well, and the parts are still available in the Mopar Performance catalog for A-body drag racers looking for extra sidewall clearance. Yeah, it's true. If you look at the Mopar Performance catalog, soon to become the Direct Connection catalog. In fact, big news on that in early December. I hear the Direct Connection's coming back, wink, wink. But with that said, the A-body leaf spring relocation kit was an ingenious way of moving the springs inboard without radically altering the car or the hard points where the springs bolt to it. So kind of a cool thing. And again, 68 Hemi relocation kits, you can always tell it's been done. If you look at the back of a car so equipped, you'll see that the shackles, instead of coming straight down, zigzag inboard on each side and thus move the springs inboard. Again, it's all about getting the leaf spring an inch away from the sidewall of the drag slick, where contact would be disastrous, obviously. Okay, let's move along. More Hemi dart info with fact 774. The 1968 Hurst Hemi darts and Barracudas were the first factory-issued race Hemi package cars with front disc brakes, while production 340 and 383 Dart GTS offerings of 68 came standard with 10-inch front drum brakes or optional 4-piston disc brakes up front. Both retained the standard A-body 5-on-4-inch small bolt wheel bolt circle, for which no suitable 15-inch diameter rims were available. But on the Hemi A-bodies, where specific rotors with big bolt 5-on-4.5-inch wheel pattern were selected, This opened the door to a wider array of aftermarket mag wheel choices. Likewise, the 8 3/4 rear axle used on torque flights and the Dana 60 rear axle used on the 4-speed Hemi A bodies were also fitted with big bolt axle flanges and 10-inch drum brakes. It's true, the 62, 3, and 4 max wedge cars and the 64 and 5 race Hemi cars had 10-inch drum brakes front and rear. But again, for 1968, the availability of disc brakes from, I think it was the Bud catalog, made the 68 Hemi Dart and Barracuda the first disc brake equipped Mopar Superstockers. Now keep in mind, in 67, there were those street Hemi vehicles, the RO23 Plymouths and the WO23 Dodge hardtops. They were race Hemi-ish. They had street Hemi engines, but they too had 10-inch drum brakes up front. I might get into that in one of these next facts. I think I do. Anyway, let's move along to fact 775 with more brake information. The 1968 Hurst Hemi A bodies were the second factory drag race package cars delivered with dual circuit master cylinders. The 1967 WO23 Dodge and RO23 Plymouth A stock Hemi hardtops were the first with these dual circuit race brake systems. Within the tight confines of the A-body engine bay, the larger master cylinder and driver's side Hemi rocker arm cover fought for the same space. Again, Bob Tarozzi, who was the head of the Hemi A-body development team, conjured an elegantly simple solution using an aluminum offset mounting block that repositioned the master cylinder outboard toward the outside of the car 1 full inch. Brake pedal modifications were limited to moving the brake pushrod to the outside of the brake pedal arm and adding 1 inch to compensate for the thickness of the offset mounting block, a minor task. Also available today in the Mopar Performance Catalog is part number 5249717. These things are a must for any Hemi A-body conversion. Yeah, it's true. If you look at any Hemi A-body car, factory or otherwise, if it's done properly with the dual reservoir master cylinder, you'll see there's an aluminum plate behind the master in the firewall. And that's the plate that Tarozzi and crew developed back in late 67 for the 68 Hemi A-bodies. Okay, let's move along here to more Hemi A-body brake stuff with fact 776. Once the Tarozzi Hemi A-body brake offset kit is installed, the rocker cover is trapped beneath the master cylinder. Normally, the hard lines prevent rocker cover removal without breaking into the hydraulic system, forcing a time-consuming brake bleed after adjusting the valve lash. Again, Bob Tarozzi's roots as a hands-on hot rodder simplified things. Every Hurst Hemi A-body got a pair of flexible reinforced rubber brake hoses mounted in series with the brake feed with the fixed brake lines mounted below the master cylinder. They permit the master cylinder to be pulled to the side a few inches for rocker cover removal without breaching the hydraulic brake circuit. Yeah, it's true. If you look at those Hemi A bodies, the factory ones, you'll see flexible brake lines between the fender wall and the master cylinder. Again, those allow, after 4 bolts are removed, for the master cylinder to be sort of pulled off to the side so you can get the valve cover off. Without that, well, if you had to do a valve train repair or lash adjustment between rounds, you'd have to bleed the brakes because removing the master cylinder and those lines would be a nightmare. But again, Bob Tarozzi, I mentioned here, he was a New England hot rodder. He was. In fact, he grew up in Massachusetts, Bob Tarozzi did. He was a member of the Strokers, I think, which is a Massachusetts or Connecticut-based hot rod club. But anyway, Bob Tarozzi, something of a legend. He also had a lot to do with the 70 Trans Am cars, SCCA stuff. But he was also the chief mechanic or development guy on the 68 Hemi A bodies. Bob Tarozzi, a Mopar legend. Okay, let's move into later times with fact 777. Dodge was way ahead of the curve with its Little Red Express muscle pickup truck of 1978 and 79. Beating the 1990 through 93 Chevy 454 SS and 1993 up Ford Lightning to market by more than a decade. But let's not forget the 64 through 67 Dodge Custom Sport Special with standard issue bucket seats, floor console, chrome grille, and a quartet of 1-inch contrasting racing stripes applied over any one of 13 regular colors, it was a legitimate muscle truck, but only when equipped with the optional 426 street wedge. Standard power was the slant 6 or the 200 horsepower 318 Poly V8. 426 motivated custom sport special pickup trucks shared the same 11-inch drum brakes as lesser offerings, but were fitted with exclusive anti-hop traction bars to help the lightly loaded 6.70 by 15 tires hold the road when all 470 foot-pounds of that big 426 wedge were unleashed. Though Dodge prepared an exclusive 4-page color brochure touting the 64 custom sport special pickup, few were built and each was treated to numerous hand modifications during assembly. The 426 powered models were pulled off the normal line into a siding for traction bar installation, and surviving examples show where line workers used a hammer to make firewall clearance for the street wedge's exhaust manifolds. Yeah, it's true. Back in 1960, the early 60s, 1964 and thereabouts, the Custom Sport Special, CSS, was available with the 426. Now, you want to confuse this with, there was a San Diego DJ who built for a B Factory Experimental a short bed D100 pickup truck with a max wedge, an actual cross ram max wedge, solid lifters, big valve heads, all that stuff. That was not to be confused with the CSS or Custom Sports Special pickups. But there were, I would say a couple hundred of these Custom Sports Special pickups built with 383s and, yes, the 426 street wedge in the early 1960s. And they absolutely qualify as muscle pickup trucks. In fact, Ford didn't even get into the big block pickup truck game until 1965, when it finally launched the 352 FE big block as an option for the F100 pickup truck. Chevy was way later than that. I think 1967 was the first year that Chevrolet offered the 396 in one of their half-ton pickups. So Dodge was in there swinging with 413 and 426 wedge-powered pickup trucks as early as 1962 and 3. And again, these Custom Sport Special trucks have stripes over the hood and the roof, and you can spot them a mile away if they're real and properly restored. Okay, a little more Custom Sport Special lore with fact 778. In a move likely aimed at preserving directional stability, the Custom Sport Special was only available on the long bed platform with a 122-inch wheelbase and an 8-foot bed. Likewise, 426 trucks were restricted to the 727 load flight automatic transmission. So few 727 equipped D100 and D200 trucks were built that assembly line workers used an acetylene torch to cut clearance notches into the transmission crossmember. Can you imagine the mayhem caused by a 114-inch short bed Custom Sport Special packing a 426 wedge and 4 on the floor? I think Dodge did too. That's why the 6-foot bed and the short wheelbase, 114 inches, was not possible. So if you ever see a 426 wedge-powered Custom Sport Special, it's going to be a long bed. And keep in mind, there were no 4-wheel drive versions. There were strictly 2-wheel drivers, and no step sides either. Apparently, they were all the fleet side or style side, whatever you want to call it. But again, Custom Sport Special pickup trucks, cool stuff, but long bed only. Okay, a little more facts on Dodge pickup truck muscle here with fact 779. Building upon the legacy of the Custom Sport Special and Little Red Express, Dodge unleashed the Ram SRT-10 muscle truck in 2004. To ensure braking capability equal to the Viper-sourced 510 horsepower 8.3-liter V10 engine, the 2004 SRT-10 Ram pickup featured massive 4-wheel disc brakes borrowed from the heavy-duty Ram parts bin. First year example used 15-inch rotors and 14-inch rotors at the rear and 2 piston calipers with an eye-catching red powder coat finish. For 2005 and 2006, improved 4-piston calipers were developed by TRW Automotive and not shared with any other Dodge or Ram product. Under the cargo bed, Dodge replaced the standard 9.25-inch Ram rear axle with a revised version of the Dana 60 rear axle. Proven behind everything from 440 4-speed 67 Cornet RTs to Don Carlton's Mopar Missile 1970 Pro Stock Challenger, the Dana 60 stood ready to harness every bit of the 505 cubic inch V10's 525 foot-pounds of torque. As with the original Custom Sport Special, wedge trucks of the 60s, Dodge employed a traction aid in the form of a fifth shock absorber to help curb axle hop. It makes the 64 Custom Sport Special and 1978 Little Red Express seem pretty quaint, doesn't it? It is crazy. I remember in 2004 when they described and launched, I think Motor Trend magazine was one of the first with the scoop, the V10 Viper in a pickup truck. I thought it was a joke. And in fact, it is true that Dodge did build one or two sort of show trucks with the Ram engine, or the Viper engine in the Ram pickup, but who knew they'd put them in production? They did. It just goes to show that Dodge really was pretty aggressive and continues to be aggressive. I mean, the Demon, a 9-second streetcar, when will it end? I hope it never does. Okay, fact 780. Dodge and Plymouth muscle cars always carried an extra measure of braking capability as compared to competing cars from General Motors. While Chevy, Pontiac, Olds, and Buick muscle models ran on the same 9.5-inch four-wheel drum brakes as lesser family sedans, 10-inch drums were the rule on early 60s B-body Chrysler Performers. Better still, with the 1966 advent of the Street Hemi option, 11-inch drums were adopted. These Hemi brakes were made standard on all 1968 Up Super Bs and RT models, while GM muscle car pilots white-knuckled it on standard 9.5-inch Delco Marine 9.5-inch drums. The Delco Marine disc brakes were an extra cost option from 67 up on GM muscle cars. You know, I'm not busting on GM at all. I love Chevelles, GTOs, all that stuff. They're great cars. But I was always surprised why General Motors never gave those cars bigger brakes. I mean, maybe something from the Buick LeSabre parts bin or the Impala, which had 11-inch drums. Why not adopt those into the smaller cars? Now, I know a lot of you guys might say, well, 65, the Z16 396 Chevelle did come with 11-inch drums from the Impala. That's right. And so why did they take them away in 66? You know, in 1966, the SS 396 comes out with 9.5-inch drums. So it's kind of weird. But Mopar, well, you got 11-inch drums on anything with a big engine through the muscle car era. That's good stuff. Okay, well, that wraps up this episode of the Steve Mack's Muscle Car Show podcast. We want to thank our sponsors at High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. And be sure to subscribe to the Steve Magnanti YouTube channel. In fact, I do a lot more than this series here. We also do a lot of junkyard videos, model car videos, collectibles, and even coming up soon, we'll be doing some stuff with a 1962 Dodge Dart police car and a more recent Dodge Ram 5.7 Hemi pickup truck, and maybe even a little bit of Mustang stuff for you Ford guys out there. So stay tuned, but until then, Asta Magnanti.